Hey, so looks like we're live now. This is my second episode of the cultural breakdown. Just waiting for a little bit before more people get in, but just how's everyone's day going? Saturday morning here. Well, at least for me, I don't have a whole lot going on today. Just for the most part, doing this and then seeing how that goes from here. But glad to have everyone here, or at least people who are going to show up if anyone does show up. First episode was last week. Didn't really know how that was going to play out. Wasn't really expecting a whole lot of people to actually tune in for it. I was just kind of thinking about it sort of as a almost a practice run. This one, it's kind of more or less the same on that, but I don't know. Still kind of getting the hang of this whole streaming thing since it's still pretty new for me, but I don't know. I'm not willing to I kind of just want to continue on with this, so just to see how it goes from here on out. It does give me an opportunity to kind of talk about some stuff that I might not have talked about throughout the week, or maybe just some small stories that don't really warrant a whole video, but still gives me an opportunity to watch it. Okay, I see we've got some people coming in right now. It might seem like, because a lot of the stuff I watched, like they'll get hundreds or thousands of people watching them, and yeah, that'd be kind of cool to get to that point. But you know what? I am really appreciative for anyone who does choose to tune into this. So it does really sincerely mean a lot to me that people are actually going to take the time out of their day to watch these streams that I'm putting out, because I'm just a regular guy. I'm nothing special, but people are still willing to give it a chance and hear out what I have to say. And I do really appreciate all that. So looks like I've been kind of stalling long enough. Let's get to the first story that I have pulled up that I saw this week. It's kind of like once again talking about Ubisoft, because I was making a big point last week to talk about them, but things are starting to take a turn when it comes to what's going on over at Ubisoft. As a quick refresher for people who might not have watched the last episode or might not know what's going on with Ubisoft, they've been just suffering a bunch of high profile failures. More recently with Star Wars Outlaws, and then they have their upcoming Assassin's Creed title coming out, or now it's delayed until February of next year when it was supposed to be coming out in November. Some people are thinking that they're going to just try to remove Yasuke entirely. I'm not really convinced that's going to be the case, even though I think that would be hilarious if they did remove him and replace him with an Asian person for it. I've heard other people speculate that maybe they're going to delay it once again because a few months probably isn't enough time to just polish it up, or I don't know. Maybe that is going to be the release and maybe that few extra months is all they need. But either way, Ubisoft is kind of worried about their prospects for that. At least by all accounts, they don't expect it to do super well. They just are hoping that they can break even this fiscal year. But now we got this story coming out, which is something that people have been saying for a while, that they need to, start maybe considering taking the company private because of the current shareholders are not happy with the way things are going for them. And honestly, if they actually did do that, this, I think there's some issues with this whole prospect right here. Just this headline from IGN: Ubisoft founder Guillemot family and Tencent reportedly considering taking the company private amid high-profile flops and share price collapse. And for people who don't know, Tencent is a minority shareholder in Ubisoft right now. So they're thinking about actually working with the Guillemot family. Yves Guillemot is the current CEO, and then many of his family members are on the board of directors for it. So basically working with Tencent to pretty much buy out the rest of the shareholders, or at least that's what this proposal is talking about. Ubisoft founding Guillemot family and shareholder Tencent are reportedly considering teaming up to take the company private following a number of high-profile video game flops and the collapse of its share price. Bloomberg reports that both parties are speaking with advisors in a bid to stabilize Ubisoft after shares in the company fell 54% this year. The publication qualifies this by saying these exploratory talks may end up going nowhere, and a buyout is not the only option being discussed. Ubisoft declined to comment. I mean, of course, they should just produce better games that people want to buy. Uh, but I'm not really sure what these other options they're discussing right now. I mean, obviously, not taking it private is one thing, and I don't have a problem with them actually taking it private. I think that's something they probably should be doing. I just don't really like the idea of Tencent being one of the shareholders in it because of their ties to the Chinese Communist Party. The Gaumont family, including Ubisoft boss Yves Gaumont, holds just over 20% of Ubisoft shares, with Tencent owning just over 9%. At the time of this article publication, shares in Ubisoft have rebounded a whopping 26.33% on the news. So when they're talking about actually taking the company private, then people are like, oh, well, okay, that's good news. Let's invest in it. So then we can, because usually when you're going to do that and pay out the shareholders, you're going to give them I'm not going to say exactly what the current stock value is, but it's going to be a little bit more of a premium on it. So you'll do that to take it private. Actually, one of the other options I think that's obviously not in the best interest of the Gaumont family is some investors are trying to form a coalition in order to, I'm not going to say a complete hostile takeover, but basically force certain changes in Ubisoft and what they've been doing and how they're running the company. So maybe this is kind of a defensive strategy, or maybe it's a way to try to stave off some of those attacks and hope that they can kind of quash some of those people trying to join that coalition in order to allow them to continue to do what they want with the company. Ubisoft has endured an awful year with disappointing returns from Call of Duty competitor XDefiant, and most recently Star Wars Outlaw, delayed Assassin's Creed. So yeah, I already talked about all that other stuff right there. But kind of going back to what I was saying with Tencent and why I have some issues with the way they're currently running things or their plans for it is, like I said, because of their ties to the Chinese Communist Party here. Let me just pull up this thing. Yeah, here at this part right here, how the Chinese government controls Tencent, the seventh largest companies in the world, or the seventh largest company in the world right here. This is from several years ago. Chinese tech company Tencent has deep ties with the Chinese Communist Party. Guangzhou-based, I can't really pronounce Chinese, Southern Metropolis Daily reported that Tencent has established 275 party branches within its offices. The company employs more than 60,000 people, out of which over 11,000 are party members. So Chinese Communist Party members are over a sixth of the company in total. Founded in 1989, reported the net worth to be around $55.5 billion. So you get the idea. And when this company has a 9% share in Ubisoft, that kind of makes me a little worried because it just seems like they're trying to kind of export their influence into the world, and that's why they're doing this sort of thing. But some people might think like, well, what are they going to do if they actually have control? Because one of the things about China is they actually discourage a lot of this DEI stuff domestically. In fact, that's one of the issues that people have when it comes to Ubisoft and a lot of their games is that they're putting identity politics and other things like that first and foremost, and Tencent being a part of them. Are they going to try to get rid of a lot of that stuff at the company of Ubisoft if they have more of a share in it? And honestly, I don't think that's actually going to be the case right here, because if you look at this other thing, this is from Tencent's actual their own website. Here it is. This is what they actually have to say when it comes to DEI and other stuff like that. Our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, are important and interrelated components to create and maintain a congenial, creative, and collaborative workplace at Tencent. We firmly believe our commitment to DEI is one of the key success factors for incubating innovation and executing Tencent's corporate mission of value for users, tech for good. So it seems a little contradictory if you kind of look at it this way, where it's like, well, why is Tencent trying to, push DEI and other things like that in companies like Ubisoft? Meanwhile, they are affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, and China themselves tries to discourage that sort of thing. And one thing you could think of is almost like the plot of RoboCop, where you have the bad guy trying to increase crime in certain areas so that they can drive down property values so that they can gobble it up on the cheap. That's kind of what they're doing in a sense when it comes to Ubisoft. Is their involvement with Ubisoft has been a way to try to drive down the stock value, which they've done successfully. And now they're going to try to use that as an opportunity to take basically more control over Ubisoft at a cheap. So what's their goal is to take over with that, then get rid of a lot of the DEI stuff with it and change course with the company. And I think no, just kind of a grander scale, going beyond just simple gaming community or anything like that. But I think what China's trying to do is they understand a lot of this stuff is toxic for cultures to focus on and fixate on. So I think why China bans it domestically is because they understand it's bad for society when you try to basically pit various groups against each other like this. But they understand because it's detrimental to a society, then they're going to try to export it to other cultures, which is what they're doing when it comes to Tencent. So they basically try to say, we're going to get rid of this domestically, push it internationally, weaken other cultures as a result of all that, then we'll help and it'll help rise them up from that. At least that's what it looks like just from the outside looking in, because I don't know how you can actually square these two different things happening all at once, where you have the Chinese Communist Party banning it domestically and then having their companies basically pushing it internationally. What's this? There was a theory that the director of Ubisoft is purposely tanking the stock price so his family can buy up more of them for a controlling interest over the board, then pivot away. Yes, that's definitely another thing. And that's kind of what they're doing when it comes to this story right now is basically, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say they're intentionally driving it down. I think it could be more of less, they're opportunistic. They understand things are bad for them. So they're willing to actually just kind of benefit from it in some way, shape, or form, because I could see that being the case where they're doing it intentionally, but it's certainly a gambit if they did, because it's possible that shareholders will rise up against them, like we're seeing with some of them trying to form a coalition, not necessarily to oust them entirely. That's definitely a possibility, or just to try to exude more control over what the company is doing. But I think that is a possibility. I think honestly, though, they wanted to have a lot of their stuff actually succeed, because, if they're successful, then they can continue to do what they want as a company, because the shareholders will let them do whatever they want as long as they're actually producing money. I don't think they're willing to intentionally tank the value of their company and then buy up more shares in order to, what's the end game then? Just to make more money or just to have more control? Because if you have more control over something that just allows you to push your agenda, well, then that's ultimately a short-lived solution for them. But I don't know, because I don't want to operate under the assumption that they're dumb people out there, because I always just try to assume, even if I think their decisions are dumb, I always try to assume that they're an intelligent person and try to operate under those pretenses unless proven otherwise. And I think it would be kind of a, maybe not necessarily outright dumb move, but a very risky move if you're doing this intentionally. I think it's mostly just, though, incompetence. If maybe that's contradicting myself right there, where I say I don't think they're dumb, I think they're incompetent with that. Or I don't know. Let me just go back a little bit right there, because, like I said, I think that is kind of a interesting theory, and I can understand that being the case. I'm just not 100% convinced at this point right now. I need to see a little bit more than that. And I think if they were actually to do that, they wouldn't be looking to purchase it with Tencent. I think they would be just kind of handling things on their own right now. But right now, like I said, I'm kind of worried that the idea of that the Gamalt family and Tencent being the ones who are actually trying to buy up Ubisoft. I do like the idea, and I think it's important if they took the company private. I just think it should be different people in charge of it. I forget the firm that's trying to form the coalition. That well, let me see if I can look that up. Firm. Because I talked about it last week. I can't remember exactly the name that of the group that's trying to. They're they're basically they have like 1% share in Ubisoft, and then they're trying to form a coalition. Right now, they've reached around 10% people who are trying to actually back them on it. Here, I'll just. I have. I found this. Okay, so yeah, investment firm tells them to take it private. I should know this. It just J.P. Morgan. Oh wait, no, that's downgraded it. AJ Investments. Yes, there it is. So they're the ones who are trying to form this group. Yeah, that says here they have less than 1% of stake in the company, and that since then it's grown to around 10%, and it's ever growing as their stock value decreases. And even if the Gamalt family wanted to take the company private with Tencent, they're going to make their proposal to the shareholders, and it's up to the rest of the shareholders to actually have to vote on it, because it says the Gamalt family has around 20% shares, Tencent has 9%, so they'd be on board with that sale if that's what they wanted to do. So they need around 20 or 22% more of the shareholders to need to be on board with it. So you basically have these two competing groups right there. I think AJ Investments wouldn't necessarily be on board with that proposal right there. So they control around 10% of it. So this is where we're sitting at right now. If that's actually the approach they're trying to go with this, I'm not convinced. Like I said, they would be successful in that, but it's entirely possible. And a lot of this really does stem from the fact that what they've been putting out these last couple of years just have been failures for them, and they need to do something quick if they want to turn it around. And I'm not convinced just adding a few months of uh, fixing some of the glitches in Assassin's Creed Shadows is going to be the thing that'll actually save them. I think if they did go back and you kind of like put Yasuke, not remove Yasuke entirely, but if they went back and changed his character with an Asian person, I don't think they can do it in the time frame, but if they did that sort of thing, I think that would kind of give them a lot of goodwill amongst gamers out there, because it would show that they're really listening to the criticism. That's not going to be enough, but I don't know. I think it would help a lot if they tried to make a move like that, because at this point, even if they put out a good game, I think a lot of people are just kind of turned off from what they're doing right there because of the failure that was Star Wars Outlaw. So the game will actually have to be phenomenal for it to be a huge success, considering how much they actually spent on it. Probably, I don't know what the budget for it was. I think it was around a couple hundred million or something like that for Assassin's Creed Shadows. Maybe that's why they're really hoping that they can make it at least break even for them, or delay until the end, just kind of at the end of this fiscal year, so that when it releases, you're basically just getting those opening weekend numbers. So this fiscal year they can break even, and next fiscal year they determine that, okay, that game was a failure after all, before they move on to their next thing. And at that point, that's when we'll probably see a more of a shift, depending on the performance of Assassin's Creed Shadows, whether it actually, or whether there more people will join AJ Investment side, or whether the Gamalt family will actually gain more power. Wonder how much of his character is tied to his race, because I think they may just change the character model to Asian. Yeah, it's possible. I don't know if he's going to be throwing up the black power fist or anything like that in the game. It they probably could patch it out and just change the character model in it, but we'll have to wait and see. Shadows will fail hard. Yeah, more likely it will. I think, like I said, the only hope I can imagine is if they literally did change out the character. But I think, like I said, they could do it in a few months. But I don't know if they delay it again, because right now it's delayed until February. If they delayed it again when February comes around, uh, as long as Yasuke is guaranteed to fail, yeah, I can agree with that. If they delay it again come February, then I would pretty much be thinking like, okay, maybe they are actually going to change it out, because right now it's set to be, or was before set to be released in November, so just in time for the holiday season. And I've heard some people speculate that once February comes around, they're going to be like, we need more time with it, so they're going to delay it till November of next year for the holiday season, which would be a good time to release it. And if they did that, then I think there would be more of a possibility. So basically, the longer it takes until they release the game, the more of likely that they're actually going to swap out Yasuke, because then they have more of an opportunity to do that. Skull and Bones cost them 800. Oh yeah, I saw that this last week. I was thinking about talking about that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I I was like, oh, I'm not going to talk about that. I'll just probably mention it in my video or my segment talking about Ubisoft. And yeah, you brought it up. You reminded me on it. Thank you for that. They were hoping for Outlaws and Shadows to get their money back. I doubt they'll bring out Shadows in its current iteration. Yeah, that's kind of why they're waiting to release it, because yeah, they lost so much. The first quadruple A game that they were trying to make it out to be, and that's mind blowing. That was something I was excited about when I first heard about it, because okay, Ubisoft made Black Flag, which was a fantastic pirate game, but it was tied to an Assassin's Creed game. So when I heard about Skull and Bones, it's like, okay, well, Ubisoft already made a good pirate game, so now they're just making a dedicated pirate game. That sounds like it'd be a fantastic idea. What could go wrong with that? Well, sure enough, they failed at that for some reason. I don't know how they did that, but yeah, they need all their other stuff to try to make up the loss for that, and it just wasn't enough. They're like, okay, well, we got Star Wars Outlaws. That's going to be a next big thing, right? That can make money back. Well, no, that's not the case. Okay, and Assassin's Creed isn't looking too much better. So, all right, now we just have to figure something else out. That's why really what they're doing is just scrambling, because they don't know what they're doing with with their games out there right now. But that kind of, in a way, leads me to my next story right here, because like I was saying, Star Wars Outlaw was a huge failure for them. And I think a lot of it was because of just some of the DEI elements they pushed into it. Other stuff was just the fact the game was kind of broken. But part of that also has to do with the fact that people just aren't interested in Star Wars like they used to. This one also came out this last week from the Hollywood Reporter, talking about just the decline of Star Wars in recent years. And I love the headline, "Is Disney bad at Star Wars? An analysis." And short answer, yes. They try to come up with other stuff in this. And I think there's some stuff in this where I think it is good explanation. Other things, it's still the media trying to be nicer in a way where they don't want to necessarily just blame Disney and a lot of the identity politics stuff they push in it. They try to say like there's small subsects of the audience who are turned off by a lot of that stuff. And yeah, that's kind of true to an extent, but that isn't all of it. There's a lot of reasons why it failed ultimately, but I do think their embrace of DEI is a contributing factor, because it's stuff I've said in the past where when companies openly push DEI in front of the camera or on the screen for when you're playing video games and stuff like that, that kind of stuff is also permeating behind the scenes aspect of it too. And when you have stuff like that behind the scenes and people working on it who were hired because they were checking the right boxes and not because they're the most qualified, well, then you're not going to produce the best results. And that's kind of the things we've been seeing in recent years. Just kind of looking at this article here, there's an exchange in Star Wars The Force Awakens when Rey and Finn are fleeing from stormtroopers and searching for a way to escape. Rey spots the legendary Millennium Falcon, declares it looks like garbage, and then quickly reconsiders the garbage will do. Increasingly, that's the attitude some fans have about Disney Star Wars programming. Look, we all know this isn't fantastic anymore, but Star Wars is still Star Wars, and therefore it will do. Yeah, but that's the thing. A lot of people are just saying, like, if it's garbage, I'm not interested in it anymore. And as time's gone on, some people have just been like, you know what, it's Star Wars, so I'll just consume anything Star Wars related. And Disney, I think, is kind of banking on that, but now that's not the case. People are willing to be like, you know what, if it's not good, then I'm not going to waste my time on it, especially since there's a lot of other better stuff out there. So people would rather just spend their time on that as opposed to just consuming the product. Okay. They remain far from space junk. Yeah, there's not necessarily the most incompetent stuff, but I mean, I'm not saying they're the best quality stuff either. So let's run through Disney Star Wars legacy to date, from The Force Awakens to The Acolyte, and see what conclusions might be drawn. So it just kind of goes through the various projects that they had. The Force Awakens, it was okay when it came out. I wasn't necessarily the most enthusiastic about it, but when it came out, I was thinking like, okay, there's potential here. Is clearly a retread of A New Hope, but at the same time, I was of the mindset's like, all right, they're just trying to get their footing. They're trying to make it feel like Star Wars. Again, they're starting a new thing. So, all right, I'm willing to give them a shot. Then I think a lot of people were doing the same thing. That's why The Force Awakens made like $2 billion for them. And then The Last Jedi happened, and it was, I'm not saying that's what tanked everything, but that's kind of where things went downhill. And this points it out right here, where a lot of people didn't like The Last Jedi and how divisive it was. And then after that, the rise of Palpatine, and that was made considerably less than what we saw. It was saying here, where is that at? Oh, whatever. Maybe I'll find it later, but it does say in this article that Rise of Palpatine, or Rise of Skywalker, if that's the official name, it made $1 billion, which is still a good amount. But when you consider that the first one actually made $2 billion, oh yeah, right here. So Skywalker, there it is. Skywalker made $1 billion, which is, still $1 billion. They are incredible numbers for any film, but they were going the wrong way. When a third entry in the trilogy launching a new franchise sells half as many tickets as the first, you probably made a wrong turn somewhere. And yeah, and that wrong turn was The Last Jedi, because like I said, the first one made $2 billion worldwide. Last Jedi made $1.3 billion, and then the last one made $1 billion. And also something of note between The Last Jedi, because The Last Jedi came out in 2017. 2016, Rogue One came out, that made $1 billion. 2018, Solo came out, and that made $393 million. So yeah, it really was. The Solo was a backlash on The Last Jedi. A lot of people turned away from that, but still there was a lot of audience members who were going out to see Rise of Skywalker, because it's like, well, it's still finishing up the trilogy, and they're trying to almost backpedal with that. And that's probably the biggest problem with that, is that it was very much just a backpedal where they didn't know what they were doing. So they're like, okay, well, let's just, because J.J. Abrams, when he started The Force Awakens, he's not a very competent writer. A lot of people who know, he's just kind of like, he has a broad picture. He's the mystery box sort of filmmaker, where he has an idea which can have intrigue, but just noticed I just started a little bit ago. Welcome here. Where was I? Okay, so yeah, J.J. Abrams knows how to create intrigue, or at least that's what he tries to capitalize on. He just tries to create ideas, but he doesn't know how to follow through with them in a satisfying manner. So that's why he just started with The Force Awakens. I don't think he was actually intended to do any other more movies. I think Kathleen Kennedy wanted to bring in a different filmmaker for all of them. but after Ryan Johnson ruined The Last Jedi, or at least it wasn't as well received, and he kind of basically just deliberately tried to undo what J.J. Abrams did for The Force Awakens. They're like, well, J.J. Abrams was successful with the first movie, so let's bring him back again to try to finish it up, and hopefully that can actually make it work. And it worked in a sense that it made money for them, but at the same time, it really wasn't successful for Disney. And that's when they stopped basically producing their theatrical releases. The upcoming Mandalorian and Grogu is the first theatrical release since The Rise of Skywalker. So quite a big break. In the meantime, they've just been focusing on shows to varying successes. The Mandalorian, that was kind of surprising for me because at least I wasn't expecting much of it. And then the first season came about, and it's like that one was decent. Second season came about, and I liked the second season, but it very much felt like they were trying to set up all their other things. They were bringing in all these new characters, like they brought in Ahsoka, they brought in Boba Fett. It was something as a vessel to launch their Star Wars television universe, and all those other ones. I don't think it's really been that great so far, but it is what it is. What did you miss? I was just talking about Ubisoft and Tencent buying up a share of it with the Gamalt family. You can, I'll keep this posted on my YouTube channel, so you can kind of go back and watch it if you didn't catch the whole thing live after I'm done with this one. But yeah, I'm glad you're here though, and thanks for stopping by anyway. But yeah, going back to the whole Star Wars thing, once it became apparent, because one thing I really liked about The Mandalorian, or at least the first season of The Mandalorian, is that it felt like it was different, where it made in a way, by kind of shrinking things down and just focusing on just a lone bounty hunter doing his thing. It was a lot more interesting because it kind of expanded the Star Wars universe, because there's always this stuff going on where you and all the movies were focused on like the big picture with like the main players in the war. You never really focus on just like individual people just living their life in that galaxy. And that's kind of what the first season of The Mandalorian brought. As they got to season 2 and they started bringing in like a lot more of these other big people that we know of, and just kind of like trying to tell their stories, well then, all right, it really didn't work as well, for at least for me, because it in a way, it's like by trying to make a bigger scale to it, it just seemed like the galaxy was smaller, because everywhere you turn you have to run into some familiar faces, and I liked it better when we didn't have those. So that's why I think season 2 was okay, but it was definitely, I felt, going in the wrong direction. Season 3 of The Mandalorian was just a disaster for them, because they were just that's when you got like full blown like Disney Star Wars, and everything else coming after that was kind of an issue for them. Says in this article that Obi-Wan was successful for them. Opening episode 1.03 billion minutes of viewing for it. And where does it say that? 860 million for the final. So that's pretty good numbers for it, especially since it was also the cheapest Disney Plus Star Wars show. And you would think that that would still mean it was a success, but I don't know. I mean, it says this is successful for them, and maybe that's the case, but I do find it kind of weird that Ewan McGregor has been trying to get them to do another season of it. And so far we've heard nothing. They say that was supposed to just be a one-off thing, and that's the only story they wanted to tell with Obi-Wan, and that's it. And maybe that is the case, but I feel like if that was something, especially with all their other stuff they've been producing lately, if they had something that was successful for them, then they would go back to it, even if that wasn't their initial plans, because we saw with the Acolyte how much that failed for them and how much money they lost on that. So you would think if they had a show that did make money for them, then they'd be like, well, we didn't plan it, but it's going to make money, so we got to go back and do that. you would think that's what they'd be doing, but since they're not doing it when it comes to Obi-Wan, it leads me to believe that maybe it wasn't as successful for Disney as what we're led to believe. But I don't know. That's just me speculating right there. Because when you get to something like Andor, for instance, this was something that no one thought was going to be anything, because it's about a secondary character in a spinoff series who's already dead by the time the series came out. Like, no one was really asking for it. But one of the things about Andor is it started off at premiere episode, 400 million minutes viewed, 674 for the finale, which means it picked up audiences because people came out to watch it and they're like, okay, that one was pretty good. So I don't know, maybe we should be more willing to actually give it a shot. And up to right now, that's the best received Disney Plus Star Wars show, even though it lost a ton of money because they spent so much money on it. There's a potential for it. There's an audience for it. So people are willing to give that one a shot again. That's why Disney's renewing it, even though it could just be another money waste for them. I think they understand if they reduce the budget of it, then maybe it could be successful for them. But still, I'm not necessarily convinced, because after certain things like with the Acolyte, I don't know. I think that just kind of turned everyone off of Star Wars. Even something like Andor might have ruined it, or maybe it's not going to have any planet whatsoever because it's a different creative team entirely behind it. Ahsoka, they claimed that one was successful. Audience dropped off, but pretty dramatically. But they're still renewing it for another season because that's Dave Filoni's creation. He's the chief creative officer over at Lucasfilm, so I can't see why he would ever get rid of it. He'll insist that they keep making Ahsoka stuff and make her the central focus of Star Wars moving forward, unless other executives at Disney and Lucasfilm stop him, because that's his baby. And if he's working with someone else's money, then he'll do whatever he can with that. But yeah, then we get to the Acolyte, and oh boy, that was there's no way you can sugarcoat it. That was just an utter disaster for them over at Disney, because this is something that this article even says it cost $180 million. We now know that the actual dollar value was significantly higher than that. When they said 180 million it cost, that was talking about euros. The exchange rate for that would have been around $230 million. And at the time that was made, that statement was made, there was still months of other work done on it. So when it's all said and done, it'll probably be around 250, close to $300 million that they spent on the Acolyte. And that is the worst viewed Disney Plus Star Wars show. And it was just peak intersectional DEI Star Wars. And it was a monumental failure. It was such a failure. Disney actually had to announce that they're not renewing it. Now, ordinarily for a lot of these other things, they don't ever like to announce that they're not renewing it, or they canceled it, or they pulled the plug on it, just anything like that. They always want to just leave the door open. Like even Obi-Wan, they've never actually said outright that they're never going to do it. They just say like there's no plans for it. A lot of the movies that they've made, like Rian Johnson still has his trilogy. Patty Jenkins still has hers. D&D from Game of Thrones, they still have their trilogy, but at least they've never said that they're not doing it 100%. They just try to announce projects because they have a tendency of announcing them and then just kind of forget about them, and that's it. But for the Acolyte, they literally announced right after it was done that they're done with it, which just goes to show how bad it is. Now, fans of the Acolyte insist that the only people who didn't like it were a loud vocal minority, but the show was legitimately popular. And if that's the case, that's irresponsible for Disney, because they don't have a whole lot of stuff that's making money right now. So if they had something that's making money, it doesn't stand the reason that they would choose to not renew it because of a few people online who don't like it. If they're going to pull the plug on it, then that just means it's because the show was such a monumental failure to it. The Blacklight premiere ratings were the lowest to date for a live action Star Wars series launch, 488 million minutes, according to Nielsen's US streaming figures. Then the show's ratings sunk further, with the Acolyte dropping out of Nielsen top 10 entirely for several weeks, not typical for a Star Wars show. It was impossible for Disney to spin this one as a concluded story. The reason ended on a cliffhanger, but the Acolyte is not getting a season 2. The cancellation has been portrayed by some defenders as baffling, even conspiratorial, but the show's ratings, trend, and reception point to a pragmatic decision on the studio's part. And I do love the fact that there's fans of it who are trying to create a petition to renew it for a second season, because if it really was a good show that people like, then like I said, Disney would have done it. But they're trying to say like, no, it was really popular. People were just review bombing it, so the show failed, and that's why they renewed or they canceled it. It's like, no, they cancel it because no one watched it, and there's really no way you can spin it. It's obvious. Only delusional people believe that the show was good and successful, or people actually liked it. The numbers that we see on Rotten Tomatoes, with I believe right now it's around 18% people, only 18% of Rotten Tomatoes for audience scores. Yeah, that seems to be pretty reasonable. Only a small subsect of the audience actually enjoyed it. So that's 6 live action shows in 5 years. Just one, The Mandalorian, has been an outright hit with critics and fans and has delivered a multi-season run, which is the traditional model for TV success. This doesn't mean a single season of TV cannot be a win. Limited series are considered hits all the time, but there's a reason popular close-ended limited series like the debut season of HBO's The White Lotus and FX's Shogun were given second season orders and became ongoing series. Yeah, if something's successful, like I was saying with Obi-Wan, if that really was such a success for them, then I can imagine, even if they didn't intend for it to be multi-seasons, they would be renewing it for another season, especially since they've been having trouble finding any wins. But it just, by all accounts, it looks like that was another failure for them. The only argument you have is The Mandalorian, and even though the third season wasn't really well received as far as viewers and audience score goes, I think they're doing it for a movie because I think they understand that they're not going to be able to make it as a TV show again. If it was a fourth season, it wouldn't work. So I think they're going to try to trim a lot of the fat out and just condense it down into a movie, because that's also a lot of the issues people had when it came to season 3 of The Mandalorian, is that it seemed like it was a movie that was heavily padded and people aren't interested in that. So maybe if they just condensed it down into a movie, then it probably could be a lot better than what we saw with season 3. But I'm not really holding out much hope for that. I have to see more on it right now or hear a good word of mouth before I'm actually willing to pay money to go see it in theaters. So anything else in here? No, just talking about Skeleton Crew. I think that one was also pretty expensive, $200+ million for that. But yeah, just to kind of sum up, Disney's been having trouble with it. Star Wars fans have kind of walked away from it. You can try to blame it on a vocal minority of the Star Wars fan base, but that just doesn't hold any water, because even if it was just a vocal minority online complaining about it, the fact of the matter still is more people aren't watching it than are watching it. And that's ultimately what the issue is when it comes to Star Wars. If a show is officially canceled, may have to reimburse investors, but you don't have to if it's delayed indefinitely. I'm not really sure about that. I mean, if you say so, I don't know anything if that's the case, but I can see that being something like that too, because if you announce that you're going to be doing something and then a lot of investors invest in the company as a result of that announcement, well then, yeah, that could very well be the case, where then if say like, yeah, we're going to be doing this, people invest in your company, then you say, oh, I guess we're not going to do that after all. Well, then I don't know if you necessarily have to reimburse them, or you just have to, or because you're probably going to have to endure a loss in stock value. Because me personally, if someone's doing something I want to do, I invest in them, then they say we're not going to do that. Well, then yeah, I'll take my money out. I think it might be more in line with that. But legally speaking, I'm not sure if they have to reimburse them. I think they just don't want to have the stock hit by canceling projects like that. So they just say they're going to delay it indefinitely. But when it comes to the Acolyte, it was better for them as a company. Like, let's just tell people we're done with the Acolyte. We're not going to touch that again. And maybe that's going to be better for us as far as stock value goes. So that's why they're more inclined to announce that one as opposed to what they've been doing with some of their other projects, which I don't understand those either, because you would think that some of those other projects that it'd be helping them if they announce like, okay, we're not going to be doing those anymore. But I don't know. I mean, they know a lot more about behind the scenes what's going on with the company, so maybe it is better for them. But I don't know. I think they should just announce they're going to cancel it. All right, for my next story, kind of more, I guess, more of news about stuff that's going wrong here. Let me just where is it? Now here it is. So, sequel to Joker, Joker Folie Deux gets a D cinema score, half star on post track, on way to $47 million opening. No one's laughing now. This is I'm not saying I'm surprised by Joker 2 failing at the box office, because this is something that really shouldn't have been made to begin with. The first movie, I liked the first movie. I think it was a good, just kind of standalone story. And that's kind of what Todd Phillips set out to do when it came to that. One of the conspiracies I love hearing about this one is that Todd Phillips didn't want to do Joker. The studio was insistent that they were going to do it. So he decided to just like, okay, fine. I'll do it if you give me $200 million to do it, and I can make it a musical and do whatever I want with it. They're like, well, okay, fine. We'll trust you to do that. And then he just tanks it entirely, just as a kind of a statement to them. I don't think that's really the case. It's kind of a fun conspiracy about it. But I don't think a director is intentionally going to lose a lot of money for a studio just because out of spite. But I don't know. Stranger things have happened. I don't think he really needs that. I think his reputation will still be solidified. But still, this is a movie that I believe didn't need to be made, but I wasn't dismissing it entirely when I first heard about the news. Even when I heard that they were going to make it a musical, I was thinking they're going to have a tough road ahead of them in order to turn a profit because of how much they spent on it. Like the budget is around $200 million. So I was thinking like, okay, that's a lot of money, like 4 times what they spent on the first movie. So if it had good word of mouth, I would have given it a shot, but I was waiting for that. And I think a lot of people were waiting for good word of mouth. That's why the early previews were pretty bad for this. Let me see. It says somewhere in this article where the early preview numbers are. I think it was like $7 million. Where does it say that here? I'm not sure, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the case. It was around $7 million in the early previews for this, which, to put that into perspective, the Marvels was like $6.6 million. So this just barely beat out the Marvels as far as the early preview showings for it, which is pretty bad when you think about it. It's a shame. Like the first one, I will watch it when it comes out on the Russian sites in good quality. Hey, I can't condone piracy whatsoever. Officially, I can't condone such behavior, but you do what you need to do. I just hope that's not your your real name or anything like that if you're going to be broadcasting that sort of thing. But yes, I understand, whole mentality where you don't really want to pay money to see that sort of thing. And like I said, even when they said it was a musical, I made a videos talking about it. I'm like, okay, well, I don't get it, but I can understand if that's really if that's the route they're going to go with it. Cause actually here, I got to pull something up. Something that I was thinking about when watching the first one, because one of the things about it is we're watching the movie through the Joker's perspective. So you can actually like you can like hear the music that's in the movie and things like that. And I was kind of wondering, like, okay, well, you can kind of hear some of that stuff where like the Joker when he's dancing in the streets and down the steps, stuff like that. It looks good, but just look at this video that I saw online where they took out the music from it. Let me see. Then it's kind of because this is more what it would be like in the real world if if Joker really existed. Let me see if I can. I'm turning the audio on. Oh, oh wait, wrong, sharing the wrong screen. Man, that's why I'm not a professional at this. All right. Yeah. You get the picture where this is what it would be like if this was the real world, where it's just some crazy guy dancing in the streets. In the movie, when you're watching it, yeah, you can hear the music. That's basically what's in his head throughout this scene, because you're following from the Joker's perspective. So if in the sequel they're gonna dive into that a little bit more, and that's where they're making it a musical where you're just seeing things in the heads of him and Harley Quinn, then all right, I could see that working here. I'm just gonna
Arthur. Hey, call me Joker, Murray. Call me Joker.
you get the idea. Like I was saying, I could see a Joker movie where they were where they were just showing it through the Joker's perspective, where all the music is kind of in his head, and what you're seeing, like the musical numbers, it's just kind of like what the title says, Folie, Do Shared Madness, what's going on between him and Harley Quinn and all that other stuff. Like, okay, I'm willing to give it a shot, but I wasn't entirely convinced in the lead up to the release of that. I was saying I needed to have good word of mouth, or I needed to be convinced that the movie is worth my time. And unfortunately for them, that's really just not the case, because during the early preview, or well, not only did early previews do bad, the early critic scores weren't so good either. And that's understandable. Critics usually don't like a lot of stuff. Like, I'm fine. I think critics were giving the first one bad scores too. So I was like, okay, critics' reactions aren't good for it. I'm waiting for the audience reaction to it. And I mean, it's just not there. And from what I'm to understand, because I haven't seen it, from the people who have seen it that I trust, they were basically saying uh, it's trying to undo the first movie, because apparently the wrong people liked the first movie and Hollywood hates those people. So they were trying to basically just do something to upset them, or if that was, or at least that's the goal of it. And it's like, well, it's kind of what we saw when I was talking about with Star Wars, is when you're deliberately trying to antagonize the audience. Well, that's not really a good thing with it. So I don't want to. I've heard some spoilers. I'm not going to get into that because, well, first of all, because I don't want to put any spoilers, but also I haven't seen it myself, so I can't confirm it or anything like that. So you could probably find it on X, what people are saying about it, but for the most part, though, this just doesn't seem like it's that good. Maybe eventually, when it comes out on streaming, I might check it out, or if, but just out of curiosity, I'm just not expecting much from it, and I'm definitely not gonna pay to see it. And it's one of, I mean, if it was one of the things where the movie came out, even if critics were saying it's bad, despite being a musical, people were saying like, "Oh, that's really good," and they made it work, then okay, I would have given it a shot, and I probably would have even paid to see it in theaters. But right now, though, I think they made an attempt to do something different with the sequel to it. And from what I've understood, what I understand about it is what they decided to do just didn't work. But I don't know if you've actually seen that. Let me know what you think about it in the comments of this video. if it worked for you, go the route they took with it, or do you think they were just deliberately trying to be antagonistic towards the audience? Because from what I understand, that's pretty much the case. Uh, First film audiences and critics agreed with each. Oh, okay. So I couldn't remember whether, because I know the media was trying to, they're almost trying to bait something bad to happen with the first one, because there was kind of like the whole media coverage surrounding it where like, oh, it's going to create violence. It's just going to set the stage for like another theater shooting. So they're more or less saying like, hey, people, crazy people out there, if you do something, we're gonna make you really famous for it. But don't do it. But I mean, if you do, you're gonna get a ton of media coverage because we were saying in the lead up to the release that's gonna happen. And it was pretty disgusting the way they were going about doing it to try to get people to not see the movie. Let me actually, I'm gonna go back. There. Okay, so it wasn't so we were both right. Audiences liked it a lot more than critics, but critics it was still positive. I mean, it's I would say that's a lukewarm. It's not really like glowing reviews, but it's still decent. At least I would call that decent. Two cult classics, Mean Streets and Falling Down. I heard this is basically the King of New York, a musical no one heard of. I thought the wasn't the first one kind of a cross between Kings of Comedy and Taxi Driver? At least that's the impression I got from watching the first one. It felt like a cross between the two of them, especially with Robert De Niro starring in Kings of Comedy, and also, well, Robert De Niro actually starring in both movies, and he was also in Joker. I mean, that's a coincidence, but I think I heard that was what they were trying to go for when it comes to both those movies. But one of the things like a lot of these stories that I'm talking about today have in common is like I said, like not listening to the audiences. And there was some interesting news that came about recently. Uh, Here, let me just get this story pulled up because I found it kind of funny where there was a Variety article that came out a couple days ago where they're just blaming toxic fans for a lot of franchises failing. Yeah, that's what they're doing, and they're making some moves to try to, or some studios are trying to remedy that. I made a video talking about like kind of the main point of that article, but I did mention a brief segment of that article in there. Here it is. So yeah, I made a video talking about this article right here, and I was just talking about the overall concept, but I did mention this portion towards the end of it. Where is that? It's talking about how they're trying to actually listen to fans, because they're maintaining like the people who hate a lot of stuff online or who are upset with a lot of these franchises are basically just a vocal minority with a loud bullhorn, but they don't represent the overall fan base. Uh, they're saying there was like some studios are kind of listening to the idea because they understand that like they haven't been here. Let me see if I can see this. Yeah, super fan folk. Oh, there it is. Those who did talk with Variety all agreed that the best defense is to avoid provoking fandoms in the first place. 100% agree. A lot of these franchises, the worst responses they get are because the creatives behind it, whether the writer, director, or even the actors, started antagonizing people on social media or trying basically do what Amanda Stenberg did with the Acolyte and just said like anyone who doesn't like it is Istanphobe. I in my video talking about this specifically, I was saying how no one was attacking her until she basically jumped into the fray and said anyone who doesn't like the Acolyte is an Istanphobe and released her diss track that was actually pretty hilarious. And then once that happened, then it was like, okay, well, you're jumping into the fight, so now you're going to get hit back too. And I don't necessarily condone all the stuff that people say on social media. Well, personally, because I don't know what all the stuff said on people say on social media. I imagine people probably did say some horrendous stuff to her, but at the same time, people say horrendous stuff to literally everyone online. It's just par for the course. She's not special in that regard, but they say here some police people talking with Variety said that they understand that don't antagonize him. In addition to standard focus group testing, studios will assemble a specialized cluster of super fans to assess possible marketing materials for a major franchise project. And I don't really know what that means particularly. They don't go into a whole lot of details about it. They just say they're actually consulting with fans. And when this happened, I was immediately reminded of that Rings of Power video that came out for the first season when they had that collection of those super fans to watch it or something like that. I think it was so bad and so heavily downvoted that Amazon actually removed it entirely because it was just getting ratioed on social media. So yeah, it wasn't a good move, but that was kind of the impression I was getting for this. So I'm not really optimistic about this, especially when it says they're talking about just marketing materials and other things like that. So not like the story or anything of substance, just how to better sell it to fans of the franchise if they are in fact fans of the franchise and not just a bunch of paid influencers to try to sing the praises to it, which I think that's really what this will be. You'll get a bunch of shills out there that they'll just fly out, wine and dine them, and then they'll go out to their platforms and be like, oh yeah, this is great, I like what they're doing with it and stuff. That's probably what this is ultimately going to turn into. When they're talking about marketing materials, they're getting a bunch of people to try to market it for them. So I'm not optimistic about this, but there are some people out there who are just furious about the idea that studios will have the gall to listen to fans of a franchise in order to better get an idea on how to actually produce stuff for that franchise. This is coming from the gamer. Listening to toxic fans will only make them worse. They don't want to accept the idea that the toxic fans are in fact winning, and it's not even the toxic fans, because it's literally just the audience. The audience is voting with their wallet. They're deciding like, okay, you're making stuff that we don't like, so they're not going to do it anymore. And as a result, studios are like, well, then how do we actually bring the audience back? Well, let's listen to the fans of this franchise and do what they want. Culture war is real. Some people and minorities and feminists are trying to bully and push their agenda, and anyone who does not follow that is called racist, sexist, and misogynist, etc. Yes, that's 100% true, and that's why they are upset about the idea that studios who are producing something built off of a franchise would listen to fans of that franchise, because that means that they're losing the culture war in that sense. Toxicity is running rampant in all corners of fan cultures like never before. Gamers are angry that a real historical black man is the protagonist of Assassin's Creed Shadows. All right, going back to Ubisoft, because I just want to touch on this a little bit. There's this man in history named John Robert Dunn. And for people who don't know, I believe he was Scottish. Either way, he was British. And he had an affinity for the Zulu culture. This is back in the 19th century. And he kind of he was like an ambassador to the Zulus. And eventually they accepted him into their tribe, gave him land, made him a chief, and he was married to Zulu women. He's a real historical figure, a white guy who was a Zulu chief. Now imagine if Ubisoft announced, hey, we're going to make an Assassin's Creed game set in 19th century South Africa, where you play as a Zulu chief as the playable character who's based on a real historical figure. A lot of people in the Black community would probably be excited about that. And personally, I think like, okay, that's kind of a cool setting for an Assassin's Creed game. And then you announce the trailer for it and you see you're playing as a white guy. Would it really matter if they say he's based off of a real historical figure? No, I don't think people would be accepting of that. To be like, oh, you're going to try to comb through the Zulu history to try to find the one white guy to build your game around. And I would agree. It's like, yeah, that seems to be what they're doing. You could have had a lot of people you could talk about, or you can make John Robert Dunn a secondary character, but instead you're trying to focus on a white person deliberately because that's the if it was like a person who was saying they wanted to push more white people in gaming and that's what they did especially, well then people would be upset about it. You get a company like Ubisoft who are trying to push DEI. They're saying we're making a game set in Japan and you're playing as a samurai, and then they comb through Japanese history to try to find one black guy that they can say was a samurai in order to base stigma around him. Yeah, that's why people were upset and saying like, if you're gonna make a game based around feudal Japan where you're playing a samurai, then it should be an Asian person. But no, apparently that's racist though. But if you say John Robert Dunn shouldn't be the playable character, then that's entirely fine. I still just love the idea that they would they would do that, shoes on the other foot, but you can't expect consistency from a lot of these people. Going back to this article, viewers were enraged as a coven of lesbian space witches in Star Wars Acolyte. The mere idea of women in Ghost of people weren't complaining about Ghost of Yotai because of a female character. They're complaining about the voice actress. I talked about that too, where it's not necessarily means that the game's going to be bad. It's kind of a red flag when you have someone who's an activist working on a project like that, because presumably that means that company is comfortable with hiring activists, and if they're comfortable with hiring activists, and maybe there's people who are activists working on other facets of the game, and you could get the game coming out and there's bad story, a lot of glitches and other problems with it that's broken. That's why it's just kind of a red flag, because when companies hire based off check boxes instead of merit, then you have a lot of issues like that. Ruffling feathers and two women kissing in House of the Dragon caused user review scores to plummet. That was mostly in Middle Eastern countries, if I remember correctly, and that's because they don't really like that sort of thing in those places of the world. Then those modern people would be enraged that a white man is taking opportunities away from black people. Yeah, they're never consistent in what they actually do. That's why it's funny to point out the hypocrisy on their side, because I even said, like, I don't even care if Yasuke was included in Assassin's Creed. In fact, if they're setting it in a time period where he's there, it's like, yeah, show him in the game, feature him. Same with featuring John Robert Dunn in an Assassin's Creed game that was set with the Zulu Nation, because it's a part of their history. It's kind of an interesting aspect of their history. So if Assassin's Creed Shadows came out and you had Yasuke as maybe like not a companion, but like an ally in the game, and he was someone who would help out the protagonist, because we've seen that in plenty of Assassin's Creed games where they'll use historical figures as an ally to the main character. That's perfectly fine, and introduce people to that history. But trying to make him the focus and also portray him as a samurai when he wasn't a samurai, to me, that's not necessarily the best way to go about doing things. But that's what you do. Regarding your analogy with that, I understood with that. Thank you though. But yeah, 100% though, if they did do that, they would be outraged and would try to find some intersectional reason why that's bad. And ultimately what it comes down to is white people bad, and they need to have less of it. That's why when they say diversity, they just mean less straight white people. Backlash takes form of direct harassment, death threats, nonstop bigotry pouring out of every comment section. That goes both ways. And also when you talk about that kind of stuff just occurring on social media, you really have to take it with a pinch of salt, because like I said, I get those same harassing comments and death threats and stuff like that all the time. It happens to everyone. It's happened since I was a kid, and when Xbox Live first came about and I first started playing it, that was happening to me then. It's just part of being on the internet. So don't try to make it seem like it's only going one way, because it's both ways. Also, I don't have the article pulled up. Last year I remember reading something about how some studios will actually have deliberate sock puppet accounts in order to try to steer social media in the direction that they want to do. They'll even go so far as to try to create profiles where they'll have people within their marketing departments literally have secondary accounts that they just kind of like create a persona for this account, occasionally post on it so it seems more legitimate, and then comment on other stuff and try to steer it in a certain direction. It just goes beyond a bot accounts, which if you really think about it, when you're a studio, when you have a lot of people working for you in the marketing departments, it's pretty easy just to be like, yeah, everyone in marketing, just you also are responsible for 2 or 3 different social media accounts on Twitter. You just create those accounts, just use them at your will. And then when you want to, then start steering the conversation in the direction that we want to do. Sometimes it's trying to make things seem more positive. Other times it might take the form of trying to harass people so that you can always have your actors claim victim. So you have your own marketing people attacking your own actors, calling them racist things. And then all of a sudden they could be like, oh, look, see what people are saying about me on social media. So I don't necessarily buy a lot of those things unless it's from someone I know is a legitimate person. And a lot of these major creators, they might crack jokes and stuff like that, racist or sexist nature, but they're jokes. They're not necessarily sincerely racist or sexist like they're trying to portray. But these people don't have a sense of humor. So if you're saying anything like that, they're going to try to just treat it in the worst way possible. Variety spoke to several studio executives about these toxic fans, and they noted that it's gotten incredibly loud in the last couple of years. It's because it's a large portion of your audience don't like what you're doing. And if you have any criticism against them whatsoever, then they just try to dismiss it as ists and phobes. That's particularly why they try to amplify these people out there, because there's a lot of legitimate criticism for things like the Acolyte, for instance. And they're trying to paint any criticism as just coming from ists and phobes. So when there is legitimate criticism coming at them too, they'll just lump all of it together and just group it and say, like, you get one like racist comment, then you have 10 legitimate ones, and say, look at all these, we're getting like all these racist comments now because of backlash or something like that. At least that's kind of the strategy they've been employing. However, executives admit that the vast majority of any fandom are casual fans, and that this volatile subgroup has simply been given a bullhorn by the internet to blow into their respective echo chambers. Is it really an echo chamber? Because apparently everyone is hearing it. And a large segment of the audience, they say casual fans, well, they're not showing up. So even if a lot of these echo chambers are saying bad stuff about them or horrendous things, like, I'm just going to grant the premise on that one. It doesn't mean that there's not legitimate criticism with there and there too. And many of these casual fans probably agree with the legitimate criticism, and that's why many of these franchises failed. Like the Acolyte didn't fail because of a small subsect of the audience saying horrendous things to the cast and crew, assuming that those comments were legitimate comments from actual people out there. This is it's kind of like Schrodinger's toxic fan, where they say the toxic fans are both a vocal minority and don't really have any control, and at the same time have the power to destroy franchises because of their echo chambers. You see, it doesn't make sense with what they're doing. That's why I don't think they sincerely believe that they're a vocal minority. I think they understand that this is really just the audience doesn't like what they're producing, and they try to dismiss all the criticism, but it really just hasn't been working. The approach has been to ignore them, but many are now putting together super fan focus groups who will tell studios if something will cause backlash so that they may avoid the toxicity altogether. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that entirely. And this article tries to paint it as like, when we say remove stuff that causes toxicity or cause people to get upset, this article is trying to paint it as like, oh, that means no black people or no women or something. It's like, no, that's not what they're saying at all. What they're saying is stay true to the source material. Don't try to deliberately antagonize fans, because that's really what I would say first and foremost if I was on one of these focus groups, was literally just don't attack the fans. If people say they don't like what you're doing, just say, all right, yeah, I understand you have criticism about it, but we didn't make these decisions lightly. We have a plan for what we're going to be doing. And if you just give us a chance, we think you're going to enjoy what we made. That's a better approach than be like, oh, well, you just don't like because you're sexist and racist and other things like that. Because we've seen time and time again that doesn't work. Maybe they're trying to take a different approach. One approach I would also say is don't let some of your people talk on social media because they're probably your worst enemy. Rachel Zegler is a prime example of that. Someone who I can imagine Disney executives are like, I just wish that girl would shut up because every time she opens her mouth, she just makes things worse. I don't I don't like the word criticism. It implies it is bad. I would call it uh, articulate opinion, sensible replies, honest opinions, etc. I mean, everyone is allowed to have a choice and preference. No, 100%. I would say criticism, and that there criticism isn't necessarily. I mean, I guess it's negative, but there's like the whole constructive criticism where certain decisions that are made on shows and movies, video games, where it's like, do you really need to do that? Is that the best way to actually tell your story, or is that the best thing for a character to do, or maybe they could actually do this instead? Uh, I would call that like I would almost say like if you're asking them to do anything different than what's being presented or what they already established, then that could be considered criticism. But it's just a matter of how you go about it. It's not criticism as in like less black people or something like that. Because uh, I mean, maybe that I guess that could be considered criticism, but that's not what I'm talking about. And most people, though, that's not what they're talking about. I usually say it's kind of like what I was saying with the casting in Ghost of Yotai is when you're deliberately trying to change races and sexes and other things like that, that by itself doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be bad. All it means is that that's kind of the focus, or at least that's the what they're trying to present to the audience. And when they're doing that, it's like, okay, so you're not focusing on the story or character or anything like that. You're focusing on various check boxes. And when you're doing that, and when that's when they're presenting to the audience, then I'm just thinking like, okay, well, does that mean that's what the studio is doing behind the scenes? They're not hiring people based off of merit or what's best for the company or what's best for the story. They're hiring people because they check the right boxes. And that's not a good thing either. It'd be the same thing where if they're hiring people because they're a close friend of someone at the studio or they're a cousin or sibling or whatever. It's like, I would always say, always hire just the best people for the job. I don't care what race, sex, religion, whatever. As long as they're best for the job that they're trying to do, then by all means, I don't care what they do. But when they're trying to focus on the other things, that's when I have an issue, because then it's just kind of a red flag that there's going to be problems with it. And more times than not, when it comes to things like the Acolyte, when they're like, we wanted to give a queer woman a show, and she said she wanted to represent her own self, basically make her own fan fiction and tell the Star Wars that she's always wanted to see and stuff like that. It's like, okay, well then that's not a good sign, because then you're not approaching it from the right angle. You should always be thinking about it like, what's a good Star Wars show that people would actually want to watch, that we think fans of Star Wars would enjoy, not what I personally want to watch because I've never seen before, because that's not really the right way to go about it. Uh, this mentions the ugly Sonic. This approach legitimizes toxic fans, and that's why they hate this, because they don't want to understand that in the culture war they're losing this fight, and studios are starting to basically, I would say cave. Or I guess you could say cave. I would say it's more like coming to their senses. It concedes that if they are loud enough, we should listen. Yes, you should. If the audience is telling you what they want, you should listen to what they're saying. So why would they be quiet? If studios are willing to make changes to the films themselves to avoid backlash, it tells the instigators that they can bully studios into doing what they want. Only instead of fixing ugly Sonic, they'll be removing queer kisses. Oh man. This is what they think. This is really what they think. They think people like the only people who don't like this stuff, the only criticism we have is because of these check boxes that we're throwing into modern properties. And that's not an entirely, it's literally just saying that the criticism is, are you focusing on the right things? Are you doing this just because you want to insert these groups into your properties as opposed to trying to tell the best story? Because yeah, fixing ugly Sonic, everyone was on board with that and it worked. And as a result, that was successful, and it spawned a franchise. Third movie's coming out in a couple months, and that's one of the few movies that coming out it's going to be coming out pretty soon that I'm genuinely interested in watching, because the first two, they're not necessarily great movies, but they're fun movies. I like them. And what's interesting about this upcoming Sonic one is supposed to come out the same day as Mufasa. I am curious what's going to happen with that. If it's actually going to be successful, or if that's just going to be another flop for them. Let's see. It doesn't address the root cause of the problem. Toxic fans have always existed. One executive even said that they don't know that it is really that much broader than where things were in 1995. No, that's the whole point of a fan, is you're fanatical. You really like something. And so if you don't enjoy it, then you're going to be vocal about it. It's not long before The Phantom Menace, a movie so hated that fan harassed child actor Jake Lloyd until he eventually quit acting. People were upset with him about his portrayal in that. I do know they didn't mention Ahmed Best here. A lot of people have tried to say like, oh, he nearly drove himself to self-delete as a result of they try to say fan backlash, but it was actually media backlash. The media thought he was a racist caricature, so they were pretty hard on him, and it got to him, but he was able to overcome that. In fact, for Ahmed Best, he even said the media was the problem and the fans were actually good to him. Jake Lloyd, it was a combination of both, but at the same time, yeah, he was a kid, and I don't remember exactly, but from what I'm to understand, a lot of the criticism wasn't even necessarily personal. It was just the fact that he wasn't good in the movie, and that's fair criticism, but he was a kid. He couldn't handle that. And I understand that entirely. That'd probably be hard having a big spotlight shine on you like that and people criticizing your acting ability. So that's ultimately why he quit. And I mean, me personally, I wish him the best. And it's not even necessarily just for him too. It's the same with a lot of the people, even in a lot of modern Star Wars stuff, like John Boyega, Daisy Ridley. I don't have anything against them personally, because from what I've seen, they really haven't attacked the fan base or anything like that. Maybe they have, or I just haven't seen it. But I normally don't care what people about the actors or people involved with it, because I think like, okay, you can criticize their performance, but leave them alone so long as they're leaving you alone. So at least that's kind of the approach I get. And like I already said that with Amanda Stenberg, people didn't say anything about her until she started mouthing off. That's why people would attack her, but not necessarily some of the other actors in the Acolyte. In fact, there was some of the people in the Acolyte that there was a lot of members of the audience who hated the Acolyte, but they were still defending those actors. You're saying like, I'm just nothing against them. I just feel kind of sorry that they're stuck in a crappy show like this one, when you can tell that they're just trying their best and they just have a terrible script to have to work with. Those perpetuating this culture used to be shunned. They were embarrassing, treating franchises like flesh and blood. And so rightfully, nobody took them seriously. And you probably should take fans seriously. But through YouTube and Twitch and other platforms of that ilk, they were able to voice their views and find like-minded people, building entire communities around bigotry and hatred. This gave their ideas a platform, bolstering their confidence and amplifying their dogma so that it reaches and inspires even more people. What many learn from this is that outrage sells, which has only worsened the problem. No, the problem is this is going with the approach that people who don't like what these franchises are doing, what these studios are doing, are creating other like-minded people. That's not what it is. The reason a lot of these people who are criticizing this stuff have big channels and why they're growing, it's because more people agree with them. And that's really what it is. The majority of the audience agrees with these people, and that's what causes them to grow. You can't be like, oh, I love the Acolyte, then you watch like a Critical Drinker video or a Nerdrotic video or something like that, and then all of a sudden like, oh, I did love the Acolyte, but because of what they said, now I hate it. That's not how it works. In fact, that's why a lot of these people will also be attacked by fans of those shows, because it doesn't create detractors from it by voicing your opinion online. All it does, it might kind of bring them all together, because there's people out there who be like, oh, I just don't like this thing and I feel like I'm the only one. But now because of the internet, it's like, no, you're not alone. There's other people who share your view. And that's what happens with this. So it's not that these people are basically creating detractors for it. It's just they're amplifying them, and it's kind of like showing studios like, if you don't listen to us, we're not gonna, or if you don't do the right thing, we're not gonna just accept what you do and just consume whatever you put out for us. We're gonna say what we believe. There's other people who agree with us who are also gonna decide not to consume your product, and as a result, it ultimately fails. And it's people like this who are just concerned about representation, pushing an agenda. They're treating it as if like the studios are negotiating with terrorists. And I would almost argue that the people who, like the author of this article, let's see, James Thornton or Troughton, that's how you pronounce the name. Yeah, I would almost say that they're the ones trying to hijack other things and demand that they do what they want. To me, that's more terroristic than what the fans are, who are just saying, no, just do what we actually want. But it kind of goes on like this for a while, trying to bring up other examples of when people voice their opinions. And so, I mean, I could probably just be repeating myself if I continued on this way. Let me just kind of end with how they end their article. It's a difficult battle for studios, choosing whether to fight or ignore bigoted fans who are constantly told by content creators to be angry. No one's told to be angry. We're just told not to, or yeah, just told not to mindlessly consume product. But even then, like, at least for me personally, I don't try to tell anyone what to think. I've always said, if you like something, you're free to like it. There's lots of bad things that I like. My go-to movie that it's a bad movie that I like is the 1993 Mario movie. I know it's not good, but I still enjoy it anyway. It's a fun, nostalgic one for me. I liked it as a kid. I still will watch it, even if John Leguizamo has gone crazy. Still, I enjoy that movie, and I'm not trying to say that it's not a bad movie. I understand that entirely, and that's why I say people can like stuff that's bad, even if I hate it. You're free to like it. And most creators out there who don't like this stuff are still saying the same thing. If you like it, go ahead, like it. But we're just going to say this is why we think it's bad. But the answer will never be to give into them. They thrive on outrage, and meeting them on their terms cannot work if the goalposts are constantly moving. These focus groups are a disaster waiting to happen, because legitimizing these voices will only make them that much bolder. And it's like I said before, I don't think this is really what's going to happen. I think what's ultimately going to happen is basically just what we saw with the Rings of Power, or what we saw with what Ubisoft tried to do with Star Wars Outlaws, where they're just going to try to bring in some influencers in order to wine and dine them and get them to sing the praises and do the marketing for them, and make it seem like, oh yeah, you can enjoy this thing coming up because I'm giving it my seal of approval. But those people are going to lose their credibility, like we saw a lot of the Star Wars shows lose their credibility because they were trying to sing praises for the Acolyte when the overwhelming majority of Star Wars fans don't like it. So I think if they do go down that route and try to actually use that to, I don't know, boost kind of their appearance on social media, then it's going to be a short-lived solution. Then eventually they're going to have to be like, okay, we're going to have to listen to fans. But right now you get this article and other articles like that, and people on social media just upset because the idea that studios will listen to fans is just the worst thing in the world. But I don't know. I think that's kind of a dumb approach to it. I think they probably should listen to fans, because if you think about it from a marketing perspective, there's lots of people online who are saying what they want. You don't have to bring in a panel of people, maybe early stages, just like, this is what we're going to be doing. This is what we plan on for the script and the story. Maybe you could listen to that, but I still think if at that stage, then there is early enough time to implement some real changes that can help fix it. But if it's literally just in the marketing phase, then that's too far along to do anything of value. At least that's what I think about it. But that's pretty much all the stories I have for today. Show not as long as last week, but I still think that was a good amount of time. But glad I got an opportunity to talk about these stories. And even though I did some videos on these subjects earlier this week, I think I was able to dive in a little bit more detail and give more of my thoughts just kind of off the cuff, because I don't like it when I have to just kind of condense it down and just I mean, maybe it's better with a little bit more polish to it or whatnot, but I do like being able to just to kind of go through the articles and free flow with my thoughts on this one. That's kind of what I do in the preparation for most of my videos. So I think it is a good opportunity to do this in front of everyone. And also, like I said, talk about some things and hit on more details of areas that I might not have paid as much attention to in the past. But that's really all I got for today, though. Thank you once again for deciding to tune in for this week's episode. And I'm glad if you have been enjoying my videos and you continue to watch them. And if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel because I am enjoying doing these streams. This is only my second one right now, but I think I will probably continue doing this at least as long as people are willing to watch it. I don't care if it's just 1 or 2 people out there watching it. As long as you're willing to watch it, then I'm going to continue to be here. And also be sure to check out the rest of the videos I post throughout the weeks. I usually post at least 1 video daily, or I try to, so make sure to check those out too. And if you can, click those like buttons on them and share the videos out there with your friends too, because I'm trying to get out. It's really hard when you're starting off on YouTube and really make a name for yourself or really get some notoriety. So sharing the videos really helps out a lot. And also just, I like it when people leave comments too, because I do try to respond to comments. I like that interaction. I think it's a little bit better for that on streaming because then I do get the live chat there, so I can actually talk with people in this too. I would hope to get more of that in the future, but for right now, that's all I got. So catch you all later. Bye.